Latvia Weekly, your independent guide to the news in Latvia, with your hosts, Otto and Joe Horgan. And Kārlis Streips. Labdien visiem, and welcome to episode number, believe it or not, 90 of the Latvia Weekly podcast. I am Joe Horgan. Seated next to me is Otto Tabuns, and on our space age view screen, which looks like something straight out of Star Trek, right above us, we have Mr. Kārlis Streips. Otto and I are here in Jelgava on this rainy day, but Kārlis is all the way in Riga right now joining us. So Kārlis, how are you today?
I am perfectly well. Thank you kindly.
That's excellent. And Otto, I know you were just in Riga as well. So guys, is it just as rainy in Riga as it is here today in Jelgava?
We were promised rain all day long, but there hasn't been very much. Maybe it all went to Jelgava.
Well, it's certainly on the way. I saw it in Uolainen and there. And actually, a friend of mine told me that somewhere on the eastern or northeastern outskirts of Riga by the Ugla Lake, actually the weather was pretty pleasant and sunny today. So, you know, even within the vicinity of like 20 kilometers or like 15 miles, you can have all the plethora of weather conditions that are available in this country.
That's certainly true because the weather for Riga is not necessarily the weather for everywhere else. But we have much more than just weather to talk about today. We have a whole huge show, really. And I remember when I shared the show document with Kārlis, his first reaction was, there's no way we're getting through more than a third of this. So we are going to try to get through everything that we can because this was a pretty interesting week in a lot of different ways. So where I would like to start for today is with the new Rīga City Council polling data, which just was released a few days ago. And for those of you who listen to the show regularly, you know that we just did a special on Rīga City Council election. Otto and I broke down the major parties. We broke down all the parties which are participating in the election. First, we did a episode about the parties that are already in power in Rīga City Council, and then we did an episode about the contender parties, so the ones that are trying to get into power. And so we're not going to go into who all the parties are. You should definitely go and listen to that. We were planning on doing an episode this Thursday about continuing this because it's a series, and we were planning on talking about the answers that they have to questions that people on the Expats in Latvia Facebook group, which many of you are members of, asked, and they're answering that. They're in the process of that. We haven't gotten all the responses back yet, and for a number of reasons, we've decided to push it back a week. So we're kind of in a little bit of an unplanned way going to spend a little bit more time on Rīga City Council election than we were planning on doing today. So
certainly, at the same time, I wanted to tell our viewers and listeners that should you have any specific questions with regard to the programs, you can surely ask them to us, and we'll do our best to tell you what the answer is as the programs have been published, but only in Latvian. So if there's some specific issue you are worried about, we will certainly try to indicate like which parties have talked about this and what their answers are. So use the social media or write to us. So we look forward to that.
Mm-hmm. Now, the new party polling data that just came out for the Rīga City Council election, I was going to try to get a graphic on the screen, but I didn't have quite enough time this morning to be able to put it together. So you can go to lsm.lv. It's one of the very first stories on the English version. I don't know if it's in the, in the Latvian version. I don't know if it's in the English version yet, but it probably will be translated at some point. And just a little bit of background about this polling firm, SKDS. This is one of the basically 2 or 3 major polling firms here in Latvia. And so this data isn't necessarily from today. It's from a couple of weeks ago. It looked like the end of July when they did this. Now in the national election, a lot of you remember that SKDS also did the polling in the lead up to the national election. So usually it was about a month between when that polling data was basically collected until when the results actually came out. So that's not the case in Riga because it's a little bit easier to put everything together when it's just one city. But a couple of things which I found interesting. So I'll just read through the data that came out. So first of all, Autisti by Par Progressivi is in first place with 14.9%, with Saskaņa in second place with 14.1%. And then we have, in a very kind of distant third, with about half of that, Nacionāla apvienība and Latvijas Rēģiņu asociācija or apvienība. It's apvienība, I believe.
Apvienība.
Thank you, Carlos, and Otto for correcting me. With 7.7%, then we have kind of a whole bunch of them bunched together. We have Jauna vienotība with 5.9%, Gods Kolpot Rīgai with 5.6%, Jauna konservatīva partija with 4.5%. Then we have Latvijas Krīvu savienība, or Latvian Russian Union, with 3.6%, ZZS, the Union of Greenton Farmers, with 3.5%, and then Jauna saskaņa. If you listen to our second episode about the political parties, you will remember them. We'll get into this in a minute, because this was one of the two most interesting things about the polling data for me, with 3.4%. Another one of the most interesting things for me, which we'll get into why in just a minute, KPV is with just 1.5%. Now, what I want to stress right now, because I know that a lot of you are thinking this, and I know that probably Carlos and Otto are going to mention that just as well. There's also 26.1% for this very popular party called Grūti pateikt, which was not a party that we covered in the previous episodes, which translates directly into hard to say, or not sure. So basically, there's still a fourth of likely voters who are not have not made up their mind whatsoever.
Probably also including myself.
Yeah, and
Not me. I know who I'm going to vote for.
You are? Okay. Well, so it's difficult to read too much into this data. But what was very interesting for me, so Otto, I remember last night when we were kind of talking about the data when it came out, you said that we should also take a look at, oh God, what's the other major one called? It's not Fortum, it's
Factum.
Factum. And so when you take a look at SKDS's data, taking out the people who haven't made up their mind yet, so basically if the election happened tomorrow, the data is extremely similar. It's very, very similar. With the major differences are kind of the middle parties, which are bunched together. And then also in the Factum one, Jauna saskaņa does not show up basically at all. They're just under the CT party, because there's a bunch of other ones as well. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think. So you guys are, I'm a big follower of politics, but you guys, it's your bread and butter, kind of, you as a political scientist, and then, Carlos as a political commentator on TV. I want to see what were the big takeaways from this data for you guys. So let's start with Carlos first over in Riga. Carlos, what do you have to say?
First of all, the SKDS people also conducted the same survey with people who are definitely going to vote. And what I saw there, and I will be discussing that on my TV show tonight at 10:30 on Riga TV 24, is that on the poll that shows everybody who was interviewed, the parties which are further down do not appear to be above the 5%, which is necessary to win seats. Whereas in the poll where they only interviewed those who are definitely going to vote and have made a choice, 3 of those parties are above 5%. So that's one thing. Secondly, I am delighted to see for Latvia's development and the progressives in first place, because as a gay man, I very much appreciate their liberal views on social issues. And the third thing I would say is that you can't really trust polls. In the 2017 election, the New Conservative Party in particular was polling very poorly before the election, and ended up getting much more than they expected, 13 or 14% of the vote, if memory serves. So the polling needs to be taken with a grain of salt at this point. But the main thing to me is to make sure that Harmony does not get a majority this time around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Otto, what would you like to mention?
Well, here I think we can certainly see that the potential voters, at least the ones that have already decided about how they're going to cast their votes, have given their trust to more likely relatively new political forces that have survived through at least one washing cycle of Latvian politics, as well as those forces who have always been the keenest on identity politics, which has always been a very good way how to mobilize certain groups of society since the early 1990s and even before that. I wanted also to mention that with regard to LGBT rights, we have to remember that the competence of the municipal government perhaps would go in this regard, for example, with giving the acceptance, like for the gay pride to happen in the city of Riga. Whereas if we would talk about some greater civil rights issues, that certainly would be more the competence of the national government. Although certainly for them being in the national government, that is also a good tandem to have should they get the votes, as the poll indicates. Also here, it is also an important moment to understand that here we have, at least in this one part or one set of the results that we see here, those who have decided. And it is a very important aspect, especially for those parties who are between, let's say, 3 and 5%. Because if you remember, for example, the common wisdom of the 1990s, it was that the 3% line used to be the line of death for parties, thinking that how big the statistical mistake or error may be, and how the undecided voters may vote. So I think the parties who are at the top of the list are not very surprised about this, but probably it will be most stressful for these parties that are on the edge, because they could actually get in there. And I think, like we discussed it with Joe some days ago, it could actually be the case that the coalition in the Riga government reminds us somewhat of the national coalition, perhaps with the exception of the party which will hold the leadership position.
Yeah, just a couple comments I want to make in response to you guys. So first of all, Kārlis, about the polling data, we actually had a commenter on the Latvia Weekly Facebook page who may or may not be listening right now, and he did make a similar comment. I didn't get a chance to respond yet about the inaccuracies of the polling data, but I think one thing that led to Jauno Conservative Party making such a big jump at the last minute is I don't know. I'm not a political scientist, but my kind of gut feeling about this, and I want to see what you guys think, is that a lot of the people who were undecided up until the last moment, this was an election where people really wanted change, where people, didn't want to vote for, ZZS was kind of on the down and down, and Jauno Vienotība was, still kind of recovering. I think a lot of people were trying to make up their mind between did they want to go for the more kind of extreme change, which was represented by KPVLV at that time, and something a little bit more moderate, which still represented change, but not quite to the same level of talking about ripping apart different standards and everything that had existed up until that moment. So I think that's one of the reasons why they kind of had a big bump at the last minute. But I have no idea. I'm curious to see what you guys think, if you think there is any credence to that analysis.
That may well be the case, although the new Conservative Party came into the election basically saying that everybody who works for government, especially those who are in leadership of institutions, must be fired immediately and start over, which is not a particularly modern thing. The one thing that I would like to add, though, is that I do hope that voters are going to be staying away from those parties which have no hope whatsoever. You mentioned Jaunas Saskan and New Harmony. That is a blatant attempt to fool people into thinking that it is a branch of the big Harmony Party, Lielā Saskaņa Sociāldemokrātiskā Partija, which is shameless on the part of this party. But then there are miracles like the Rīcības Party and the Centra Party, who will never be elected to anything at all. And what people need to remember is that when you vote in Latvian elections, if the party you vote for doesn't get any seats, those votes are redistributed among the parties that did get seats proportionally. And so you may end up, in that case, voting for someone you would have never have voted for in the first place.
So actually, Kārlis, I don't know if you remember this, but one of the first conversations we ever had was actually a pretty fierce argument about just this point, because this was actually after the 2016 election. So I actually mentioned on the last episode that I don't quite agree with that line of thinking, because my philosophy is always that any party should be contending for your vote. You shouldn't feel that you have to, give up your principles to compromise necessarily, and that because again, we've seen, for example, in the previous Riga City Council election, parties that were considered not to really have a chance, like, even Javna Konservativa party at that point was kind of one of these parties on the outside, like, is a vote for them really kind of a waste or something like that? And we've seen these situations where, that's not quite the case. And also, as we were talking about in Latvian elections, compared with America, where there's really just two parties which have a chance of actually, winning in first past the post, with this kind of parliamentary system, and coalitions that are built, so although the party that you vote for might not come in first place, they could come in fourth place, and that still, could be valuable in some way. They can still influence the coalition. So, I understand the idea that you don't want to completely throw away your vote, for a party that's going to get 1%. Also, for example, in Maine, we generally have, because this is really where I'm sorry, I know we're getting way off topic from Latvian politics, but we generally always have at least one candidate from a third party or an independent who gets at least 15% of the vote. We've had two independent governors, fairly recently. We have an independent senator right now, so with this kind of, mentality that you have to vote for one of the major parties, that, isn't always necessarily the case. But I do understand where you're coming from, though.
Let me make one point here.
Yeah.
It's not just the issue of where the votes are redistributed. It's also that if you vote for one of the small parties, you're taking votes away from other parties. And in America in specific, in 2016, the Greens and the Libertarians got enough votes to allow Donald Trump to win in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and in Michigan in particular, and in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania. So voting for somebody, I agree, we have many more parties than America does, but you need to be careful with your vote lest you end up shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, certainly. But, again, I would argue that, Hillary Clinton lost those votes, not that they, necessarily, took them from her. But, this is, I see both sides of this issue, but, I don't quite, Otto, you want to...
Perhaps one other point, bringing also it back to the Latvian and specific local political situation, is that I think that we can already see different strategies that the parties have. I think in the case of Saskaņa, it is difficult for me to imagine that they will get in the coalition. So they might actually use this term, or at least the first period of the next administration in Riga, to hibernate, to live through this. Whereas, for some of the other ones, they have more of an ambition to get in there and use this to their political advantage, especially those who had it in their plan to bring about change in the Riga City Council and get the grabs afterwards.
Yeah, and I can mention that specifically Autisti by Par Progressivi, Autisti by Par, they in many ways kind of kicked us off with the action by Minister Juris Puce, specifically, basically jettisoning Niels Ušacals from his job and creating, more or less creating the situation. Then also with the, initiating the, what's the word? Islice. How do you translate that into English properly? The
dissolve.
Yeah, the dissolution of Riga City Council over the waste management issue. So that was particularly Autisti by Par. The big question was, are they actually going to gain from this, obvious, political move? And it looks like they will. So far, at least according to the polling data. So it'll be very interesting to follow in on that. So we will continue talking about Riga City Council election next week when we do the episode about it, and we will keep you updated. But I think we can probably move on to some other political stories. Yes. Do we agree? So speaking actually, one other thing about Riga City Council, which is very important, the situation with COVID all throughout the world has brought up the question of how voting should happen. Specifically in America, it is an extremely contentious issue, which we will not get into right now. But in Latvia, so the Central Election Committee has said that voting will only be happening in person. So we will not have online voting or mail voting or anything like that, just as a clarification. I don't think this is a surprise. This is nothing. I don't think this is a new policy. It's just a little bit of a clarification that the committee made to the to the media. But from what I understand, you do not have to vote at the specific precinct where you are
Yes.
registered, as has been in the past.
Yep.
Because in the past, you had to vote basically at the specific precinct, which usually was closest to you, not always.
Yes.
But from what I understand now, you can vote in any precinct throughout the
Exactly.
city.
And let me paraphrase the letter that I got from the Central Election Committee. That probably many of our listeners got it as well. So there is the specific voting station that they have planned you to go to. But if you cannot do that, you can freely go to any other one. But remember, then it will take a little bit more time because they will have to re-register you to that district. So to avoid this possibility that you go and vote twice. So it will take, let's say, maybe 5 or 10 minutes longer, but that's possible. I remember that from the previous vote.
Yeah.
But you can prevent that. There is an address there where you can send in. This was interesting. I got the letter at my new apartment here in Purvciemts, listing the precinct that was close to my old apartment in the city center. I have no idea where the nearest precinct is where I live now, but I will find out. And you can proactively go and ask to be moved to a different precinct, and then you won't have to wait once you get there on the day.
That's also a very good idea.
Yep. And we will also, in the one of the upcoming episodes, we will also mention about the voting procedure, which is very different from America. I know, Kārlis, you have voted, like me, in both Latvia and America, two completely different processes. It's not as simple as just you check a box. So we will get through that, but I do want to, again, move on to some other issues right now.
So just one more note about this.
Sure.
The election people are going to be passing out masks at the precincts, but what they have specifically asked is for people to come with their own writing implements so that they don't have to disinfect the pens that are usually used.
That I actually did not hear that, so that makes a whole lot of sense. So definitely make sure to do that. Okay, going into national politics now, leaving Riga, but still in a local way. So we've been covering in great detail over the last few months, or really years actually, since the beginning of this podcast. It has been a major issue, this idea of regional reform, specifically the reduction of the amount of municipalities in the country from the massive amount that we currently have, about 120, to something more manageable, around 40, which, again, the actual number is still a little bit up in the air because the two of the municipalities which are being merged with other municipalities are officially contesting this this reform in constitutional court, and these are the municipalities of Ixchile and Tiruji. Tiruji, is that Tinuji, Jesus. And
let me say, to make that more precise, there are 6 or 7 which have filed requests with the Constitutional Court. Those are the 2 which the Constitutional Court has already agreed to consider.
Yes, and that has happened like this week specifically.
Okay. Because I from when I was reading, at least, so I was probably reading an outdated story then when I was preparing this. Those were the 2 that had officially been mentioned. Because I knew also at least that Salas district was also planning on this, and there were others that had been threatening it.
You are both right, but I'm also right in saying that that is the story of this week, and those have happened before that.
So anyway, we can all agree that we're all right as usual. So, but in any case, I mean, the major issue is that they're not the only ones that are going to contest this, and the Constitutional Court, from what I understand, is saying that they will allow these municipalities to join their cases together to give them more strength, to be able to give kind of a combined legal force instead of having a bunch of small minor cases which are all basically saying the same thing, which is definitely a boost to the municipalities. But I don't know. I mean, do you guys think that this is going to hold up in constitutional court? Because I don't understand how they can really make an argument that this goes against the Latvian constitution. But both of you guys are more clever when it comes to constitutional law than I am. So maybe let's start with Otto first.
Well, certainly they will have to deal with this. They cannot just discount it. And also the Constitutional Court representatives merged it together not only because of those very beneficial arguments, but also of the practical understanding that they will have to make a decision before it becomes the law, because it is not only the question of the national law, but also implications to the European level with all the planning and all the contracts, so that it is not the case that let's say these different municipalities start, for example, signing waste management contracts, and then you would have, let's say, two waste managers going to court fighting, like, which is then in charge of like the new administrative unit. So there are a lot of spillover effect possible. So the Constitutional Court will have to work on it and work on it fast. But certainly there could be some arguments that they could use, like, for example, the criticism of both the national one and the one on the European level about the way how this has been done, and they can even invoke the argument that has been used in media and in public discussion, for example, in the protocols of these meetings where they have had to discuss this, or even the fact that they do not find like these public discussions valid enough, arguing, for example, that as some had argued that the ministry told their opinion and that was that. So there would be a variety of arguments that these municipalities could use. It will then depend on how well the government argues in opposition, because it is not the Constitutional Court which will then make up like the third argument. It will be this competition between these two cases. So it will be for Minister Puce probably tougher than he thought that the Riga City story would be. So the Riga City story seems to be resolving, but the municipal one now will make him bigger headaches.
Certainly, yeah, and definitely less popular among a lot of Latvia's voters. Carlos, any thoughts you'd like to mention about this one?
A couple of things. First of all, the law is in place. The Constitutional Court is considering aspects of it, but that doesn't mean that the law is not in effect. That's one thing I would say. But the second thing that I would want to say is that the debates about this in Parliament were the longest debates in the history of Latvian parliamentarianism. Now, I don't know whether in each specific parish people were happy with who came and who said what and who said whatever, but the main thing is that we are having a local government election next year in June. And the law was passed specifically to do that 1 year in advance so that everybody can reorganize into the new districts in preparation for this local government election. And the main thing to me is it is clear that the existing system with 119 administrative districts wasn't working, because there were many districts that did not satisfy basic requirements as to what you have to be in order to be a district. And certainly the national government has the right to decide on these kinds of administrative and territorial changes. So I personally will hope that the Constitutional Court will slap them down, especially given that it doesn't work easily. It has told the national government that it has until September to submit its arguments. It will decide sometime in December how it specifically will be heard. That means that a ruling will be only sometime next year. And if that means bringing the entire process of the next local government election to a halt, that is not a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, this is one of those things where just about everyone in Latvia more or less agrees that there needs to be some kind of reform, but the devil is always in the details. A lot of NIMBYism. We have this term in English, NIMBY, not in my backyard. So we all agree that we need a new power plant, but just not in my backyard. For example, or a wind turbine or whatever. So. We will continue keeping an eye on this story and updating you as it happens. Couple other political stories. So we kind of put this in the political section because this is kind of becoming an increasing political issue. We had a very tragic situation again here in Latvia where there was a mother who died during a home birth. And this is one of those things where, for Americans, for example, this, certainly doesn't sound so controversial because, it's a much more common thing. But here in Latvia, it's becoming an increasing, political issue because it's just like with COVID, which we'll get to in a minute, when it comes to, the vaccines, for example, should the vaccines be mandatory? It's this question about your individual freedom, to make choices about your health versus, public safety, because people should not be dying in home births in the year 2020. And certainly we don't want to take away people's freedoms to, make decisions over their health. But, if the person who's, working with these home births is not qualified, then, that should not be happening. And Latvia, by the way, I have, not me personally given birth, but I have participated in 2 births in Latvia here in Jelgava. And in general, Latvia is very, very well ranked in the world for countries to give birth. Our health system isn't perfect in a whole lot of ways, but we are very good when it comes to a country for giving birth and then also raising children in the future. So this is becoming an increasing political issue, something that is going to be kind of looked at by governments. What are your thoughts on this? I'll start with Kārlis this time.
Well, as a gay man who has no children, it's hard for me to know specifics about midwifery and whatnot. But there was a discussion of this in the Twitter feed that I show on my television show. And the one thing that really caught my attention was somebody who wrote, okay, now does this mean when you have a toothache, you're going to go to a blacksmith because you have metal in your mouth? I personally... I have gotten to the age of 60 without ever having spent the night in the hospital. But
wow.
I know that if I get sick, I will go to the hospital. I will not look for quack folk medicine or anything like that. As far as I know, midwives are carefully trained and certified and registered in Latvia. But I suspect if I had a wife and she was going to have a baby, I would want to go to the facility that is known as the birthing place.
Yeah.
Rather than entrust it to just some individual.
Yeah, and that's actually a very important point that you just mentioned. So when we hear the term midwife, coming from America, that sounds like like an alternative medicine, like a chiropractor, for example, or like a homeopath. But here in Latvia, they are trained. We have midwives in the hospital. So my wife had a midwife who was helping in the birth. So they're basically like the birth specialists, but they are very highly trained. I don't know exactly what the training situation is, but it's not like some kind of hokey pokey spiritual type thing. It is a serious profession to be a midwife here in Latvia. Otto, any thoughts real quick?
Yeah, so I think there will be two issues that will go on. Like one thing is, for example, maybe some kind of additional standards for the equipment that the midwife or the family has to have, because according to what was reported by TVNet, for example, there are situations that between 3 and 10% of newborn babies might require resuscitation, which is something that, of course, the midwife in a home environment cannot do. Another issue is the question of the legal consequences for the midwife, or the concept of responsibility, because currently it is not regulated. And if something like this happens at a home environment, I think that currently it would be just the responsibility of the parents, and you couldn't do anything to the person who is the midwife. And perhaps that should be then regulated better to avoid tragic situations like these.
Yeah, and again, at the end of the day, we're three guys talking about this. Who this doesn't quite apply to us as much. But I'm a father, and so I do have an interest in my child not completely unnecessarily not even necessarily dying, but being injured in a horrible way that's completely avoidable in the year 2020. So this is something that we will keep an eye on. It's going to become an increasing story because it's been happening enough time. It's not one of those things that is so widespread that thousands are dying a month or something from this, but enough that it is on the agenda. Definitely. Two other quick political stories. So one is about the criminal procedure law, which I am definitely not qualified to talk about. If I were doing the show myself, I would have probably skipped this one. But Otto, I know that you are excited to talk about this. So what are the changes, and why should we be paying attention?
So it seems that the long-awaited initiative to streamline the criminal procedure law and make it easier to work with and make the judicial sector to work better has worked, as the Parliament has approved the changes in the criminal procedure law, which is the law in Latvia that regulates the way how the court proceedings are happening, and like what is and what is not permitted. And specifically, some of the more important aspects of these changes, what may be of the biggest interest to our listeners and viewers, are for example, the fact that now it will be possible to proceed with the court proceedings, even if the defendant is consciously avoiding them. So if should there be, let's say, 3 occasions when the defendant has not arrived without a reasonable cause, the judge will have the right to proceed without having him present. So that would avoid this intentional delay of court proceedings in years and years, so that we would also follow the European and international law standard that requires this due process and reasonable time in which a court proceeding is happening.
Carlos, anything you'd like to add to that?
Just that it is abnormal, and I'm sure international investors look at Latvia and realize this, that if you have a procurement, the company that loses can appeal. That goes to the administrative court. That will take years and years and years and years before a settlement is. Then there can be another appeal, and in the meantime, you can't make your investment because it's all tied up. That has never made any sense to me. The fact that Ibec Lembex has now been on trial for well over 10 years, and it's not over, does not seem normal to me. I know that there has been talk about creating a specific economic court to deal with these kinds of specific issues, but it's a much broader issue than people pretending to be sick and not showing up for court hearings.
So hopefully this will have a general positive effect on the system. One very last, I don't know if this really counts as a political story, but we kind of put it in here as well. The police have a new uniform design that is being rolled out. State police, I should mention, because there is a difference between the local police, so Pašvaldības policija, and state police. This is going to make me confused a little bit more because state police, so the new uniform actually looks quite a bit similar to the Pašvaldības policija's general kind of color scheme. So it's going to be a little bit less easy for me to differentiate between the two. But in any case, it's an interesting new color scheme. You guys can look it up pretty much just about anywhere if you type in Latvian State Police uniforms. It looks kind of Scandinavian to me. I don't know what you guys think. How do you evaluate the new uniforms?
Well, it is interesting that it was a long way for them to come up with a new design, and they firstly started to implement it with regard to their vehicles. So you might have already seen like these mostly white-colored vehicles with a bright yellow and quite bright blue streaks on them, and apparently the new uniforms will use the same bright yellow and bright blue color scheme. So we thought that it is important to announce this here so that any expats or visitors would not think that it is a scam if like a person with a uniform that you do not recognize would approach you. It was interesting that I saw this design a little bit similar to what we could see, for example, in the United Kingdom, and perhaps it could be a European trend, like to make it less heavy, like less using dark colors, and make them more visible and perhaps like more accessible psychologically.
Any comments, Carlos?
Just that light colors are more difficult to launder, and when I meet a policeman, as far as I'm concerned, he can be dressed in a tutu. I don't care what he's wearing at that point.
Well, I don't know how that would work, but I am not a fashion guy. So I think let's move on. Okay, so it is that time of the episode where we finally have to talk about the thing that pretty much nobody feels like talking about anymore. That is COVID-19. Now, the news generally has still remained mostly positive. So the amount of new cases over the last week, so we had 1 new case, then 4, then 4, then 3, then 7. It was looking a little bit dicey, then back down to 5, then back down to 3. And then today, if I remember, there was just 1 new case that I remember hearing about. So we did have, I think, at least 1 new death. So we were up to 32 deaths here in Latvia, which is, 32 too many, but compared to a lot of the rest of the world, that's definitely much better than, than it certainly could be. So we're quite thankful about that. Major news, though, which is very important to a lot of you listening, is that the list of countries in which traveling from you are subject to a 14-day quarantine has been updated, as it continuously will be over a regular basis. So the countries where 14 days quarantine are required from the EU, European Economic Area, these are Luxembourg, Romania, Andorra, Spain, Bulgaria, Belgium, Sweden, Portugal, Malta, Monaco, Czechia, Czech Republic. I learned growing up, I don't know, Carlos, about you in America. I always learned growing up, it was called the Czech Republic. Sorry, when you were growing up, it was probably Czechoslovakia, wasn't it?
It was.
So, yeah. So, okay, yeah. But now apparently they want to use the name Czechia internationally.
Yes,
so I have to get used to that.
Yes, it's
The government accepts either one of those, Czech Republic or Czechia.
Okay.
So this development has come only like in the last couple of years.
Well, regardless of if you're traveling from Czechia or the Czech Republic, you will have to quarantine for 14 days. And then also Croatia, Switzerland, Austria, and France. So for other countries, Australia, Morocco, Canada, you have to as well. There's a whole bunch of countries which are just not included in this list because a bunch of them just which Latvia does not have some kind of pre-existing agreement with in terms of visas. Then you definitely have to self-isolate anyway. You can check this list. So we're going to put this on the Latvia Weekly Facebook page. I don't think I put it on there yet. But again, if you're wondering what the red and the yellow are, so if it's a red country, visiting is discouraged completely. If it's yellow, then please consider your trip's necessity. But in general, I would really consider whether or not traveling internationally right now overall is a necessity because, we've been very, very lucky here in Latvia. Very, very, very lucky. And I think that if we are a little bit too lax, then we will not continue being so lucky. So that is the kind of major updates before we get to the economic aspect of this. But any COVID thoughts from Kārlis or Otto that you would like to mention?
Well, first of all, you two guys are not socially distanced, I would note. As to the 32 people who have died, almost without exception, and the exception, of course, was Professor Tjärve from the University of Latvia, who was younger than I am. These have been very, very elderly people, and in most cases with other comorbidities. So it's not like young people are particularly dying. I agree that we have done very well. I also think, though, that people are starting to get a little bit relaxed because there is not any guarantee that someone who comes through the Riga airport from a country where they're supposed to be quarantined for 14 days actually will do that. I actually did this as a topic on my TV show. It is not true that all of the new cases have been people who have returned from abroad. It is more people whom such people have contacted in Latvia. The 7 that you mentioned was 5 guest workers from Uzbekistan and 2 people that they had contacted with. The Tadbata Street opening concert was an example of being very careless with respect to this, and we are about 2 weeks out from that, so we'll see what that's going to mean. The bottom line to me is that even in Latvia, which has really very few cases and very few deaths and very few hospitalizations, it is a matter of personal responsibility first and foremost. And I certainly agree with you that this is not a time to go traveling abroad.
Yeah. And that's a point well taken. Otto and I next week should socially distance more probably because although we both seem healthy, we have no idea. So we should be better examples. I agree with you, Kārlis. Otto, any other thoughts specifically about the COVID side before we get to the economic aspect?
Yeah, well, perhaps we may agree to some of the experts who have told that, well, we are in this for the long run, and both we, as part of our families, and also our government, will have to find some kind of a long-term solution, as of course we cannot go into a lockdown for months and years in a row. At the same time, we will have to be more careful and perhaps think about these measures that are required for people that are more vulnerable, such as the elderly, the infirm, because, we may have all the restrictions that we want, but also, a human nature is the same and you cannot program them as you can a computer. So there will always be people who will be lax about it or maybe simply do not understand very well all the things that they have to do. So we'll have to find a way. Similarly, like Olev's argued about like some episodes ago, how do we deal with this in long term so that we also keep not only our health but also economy and all the other aspects that we cannot just forget about just because even if we have a pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. Now, getting to the economic side of this, because again, this is a twin crisis. Well, there's a lot of different aspects about this crisis. In terms of the social, political, economic, virological, epidemiological aspects of this. There's a lot of different aspects, but one of the biggest aspects has been the economic aspect, because all throughout the world, economies which had been already on not the best footing. I mean, I remember all last year we were talking about different, prognoses from both government officials and also, different economists that, we're not necessarily headed for a recession, but, there could be some kind of slowdown. COVID basically just poured gasoline on that kind of fire, which was kind of the end of this economic cycle. So the newest numbers, or at least prediction numbers, are out, and it looks like that the contraction of the Latvian economy is going to be 9.8% for the quarter. That's for the GDP. And I have listened to some different economists talking about this, and they all have slightly different takes on this. But the general take that I keep hearing is, well, that's bad, but it could be a whole heck of a lot worse than it than it is here in Latvia, because even for example, Lithuania, apparently the GDP drop was not so steep. It was a little bit better, but compared to for example the United States, compared to a lot of the rest of Western Europe and all throughout the world, I think that we have certainly not gotten the worst of it, either from the health aspect or also from the economic aspect, certainly. So any comments when it comes to the economic side from Otto or Kārlis?
Well, perhaps if we look at something that would be less controversial, whichever economist you speak to, there will certainly be a direct effect to the state budget, especially those sectors that depend on this specific percentage of GDP. So that will be healthcare, that will be defense, that will be also science, at least in law. That should be the case. Those will be the things that, without a doubt, will be affected. So their funding will be affected for the next financial year. For the other aspects, perhaps other than the travel industry, it may still be too early to say what will be the definite effect of this.
Kārlis, anything you'd like to add before we move on?
Well, of course, one key effect in all of this is that basically governments and organizations in the world have become raving socialists in this sense. Opening up the borrowing markets, approving billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars or euros or whatever in grants and loans. It would be much worse if the European Union, for example, had proven unable to come up with that $750 billion assistance package. Now, that money will not be coming immediately, but it would be worse. And the Latvian government, too, spent a whole lot of money on helping companies and individuals get through this crisis and to remain more or less healthy. And as far as I can tell, the Latvian economy has basically opened back up again. With perhaps not so much cinemas and those kinds of places, but restaurants are open, bars are open.
Well, cinemas are open too. Only now you have to sit like with a greater distance. Like I had the chance to see it for myself. But you are right. Like all in all, like most of the industries are back. It's not the case. Like for example, in Australia, it was reported that in Melbourne they're closing down cafes, bars, and entertainment venues again. So really, like economy has the chance to open up, at least here and at this period.
And one very interesting thing, just kind of going off of this, I think the most interesting indicator for at least me is that here in Jelgava, we actually just had a new restaurant open, a completely new restaurant open, which, because all throughout the world, we've had restaurants closing permanently. Even here in Latvia, there's been some cafes, there's been some shops that have closed permanently. Yes. But we actually just had a new opening for a restaurant here in Jelgava. So that is the biggest sign for me that at least for now, things are kind of on the right track, because you don't have new restaurants opening usually, unless the people running it are just complete crazy people, which maybe they are. We'll find out pretty soon.
Anyhow, good luck to them. Hopefully they persist.
I've not tried it out yet, so I can't recommend it.
From this particular perspective, Burger King was was going to open up its first outlet in Riga sometime in March or April. Obviously, it did not happen, but I am very much looking forward
Yeah.
to it.
That is
Upper.
that is one of the worst effects of COVID. That Burger King has not come to Latvia yet, certainly. So
Well, but it will in autumn now.
I hope so.
Patience.
I just hope we need one here in Jelgava, and I'm so sick of trying to.
You will not get one.
No, we have the only McDonald's in all of Latvia outside of Riga,
Yes.
believe it or not. So we might. I think it's just because probably like the truck from Lithuania just goes through Jelgava for whatever reason or something, delivering to Riga. I have no idea why we have it.
Also, like people in Jelgava are more well off. Also,
Maybe.
based to due to the fact that many of them work in Riga and have the Riga salaries.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm particularly well off, but I am a McDonald's fanatic, so I go there far too often. So not a sponsor, unfortunately. Okay, we have quite a bit more to get through, but it is a rainy, crappy day outside. So I hope that all of you listening right now are ready to strap in for a couple more stories. And we have a segment now, which Otto and I are so excited for. It has been a while since we have played this music, which I really hope plays right now. So two very quick rail stories, which we're not going to get too much into, but one of them goes right off of something that Carlos mentioned just a while ago. So the new diesel trains, which are being procured right now. So there are 3 candidates for the actual company that will produce these trains. Now, again, it is a very long process because what always happens with all of these procurements is that a company wins, then it gets, then it gets appealed, and sometimes the company, like what happened with the electric trains, the company that won it got overturned, and then another company was named, and then that got overturned, and it just became this endless carousel. So we will have to see what happens with this. It's really too early to get too excited about this,
but perhaps like one comment, it may go better than the electrical train story, because with the case of the diesel trains, it's a matter of the reserve parts, the spare parts that you cannot get anymore, either because of the historic time period or because of the sanctions regime, remembering that many of the older diesel trains that we have are Russian production, and some of the same factories also produce military goods.
Yep.
And the other thing is to make sure that the process is as transparent as possible, because the one problem with the electric trains was that a lot of things happened behind the scenes, including, as far as I can tell, the solicitation and perhaps payment of bribes. Certainly it was a corrupt process, and that needs to stop.
Yeah, certainly. So hopefully that is something that will not happen this time around, but there's not a great history when it comes to this. So eventually we will get new diesel trains, and it'll be fantastic. I will not read the names of the 3 companies because I have no competence whatsoever in any of the languages of the companies to name them properly. But
I think we will be able to congratulate the winner once we have it.
Exactly. Yeah, but.
And we'll learn its name before then.
Yes, exactly. One other kind of quick little story. This wasn't really so much a story, but just for those of you who are interested in the Rail Baltica project. So we have a lot of listeners who love to argue about its merits on the Facebook page, whether it is a worthwhile project, whether it is, we've had lots of debates about this in the past. But Otto and I are both skeptical but excited about the idea of having high-speed rail to the rest of Europe. But if you are interested in that project, there was a very interesting interview on the English version of LSM where one of Latvian Public Media's correspondents was interviewing the European Commissioner who is responsible for mobility and transportation. So if you are interested in that, I would strongly suggest going to eng.lsm.lv and finding that article. It was from just a couple days ago, so it should be still pretty easy to find. So nice to have some kind of rail news and mostly positive stuff to talk about finally for the first time in some time. We have just a couple other domestic stories before we get into the international stories, which Otto is very excited for, and Carlos as well. So first of all, I'm really interested to get your take on this, Carlos, because you have worked with Latvian Public Media before. But President Levits, he announced a couple days ago that he supports moving Latvian Public Media away from ad revenue as a major source of funding. This has been a major issue when it comes to Latvian public media for quite some time about the funding. Both, should it be funded out of the state budget? Because there's always the possibility for some kind of political influence when it is attached to the state budget, even just in terms of like, we're just going to cut, some money here or there because, we just kind of have to, there's always that threat that people are worried about. Should we have a system that's more similar to the British system where there's the fees that everyone pays that has the TV, and then also the question of advertisement revenue, specifically. It's been, political ads or also ads for alcohol, things like that, but also just the question of advertisement in general. So I really want to hear from you, Kārlis, first. Would you support Latvian public media moving away from advertising revenue in general?
Well, as one who works for a private television station, absolutely. Mm-hmm. As one who worked for many years for Latvian public television and still considers himself to be somewhat of a patriot, only if it is guaranteed that the government will find alternative sources of financing. Mm-hmm. It is not necessarily true that if the government finances public radio and public television, it automatically becomes a politicized process. Yeah. That is a question of oversight. But one thing that we could possibly look forward to, and I'm sure, Joe, you remember this, is PBS-type telethons.
Yes. Oh,
what are
yes.
they? Could you explain to me?
Oh my God! How do you explain PBS telethons? I mean, that is like I always talk about Kārlis. So here in Latvia we have the culture canon. We have this culture canon that was agreed on, these different like culture things. So the different for example, famous singers or different cultural traditions or different buildings, stuff like that. So I always talk with Liga about what would be in the American culture canon, and one of them would definitely be like local advertisements, because America's local advertisements are something that we just don't have anything like that in a lot of the rest of the world. I always show it to my American my Latvian students, and they're always just why would anyone buy there? But we love them. I'm sure Chicago, you guys, I've seen some of yours. I know you guys have fantastic ones. Another one would be auctioneering. The guys who are like, hey, who are auctioning. I think PBS telethons could go in there. So they're basically you have this whole line of people picking up phones, which I don't know if they're actually doing anything. So you see these people picking up phones in the background, and then you have this very soft-spoken host.
Anymore. You see people sitting in front of computer screens. The idea is that for 1 week a year they raise money, and they offer, if you contribute $25, you get like a tote bag. Sometimes they have things that they do auction off that celebrities have donated. They have various culture, singers and whatnot. The big ones raise millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. I took part in one when I was working in Topeka, Kansas, and we did not earn millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, I don't. That's a much better description than I could do, Kārlis, because I just was totally caught off guard going back through my childhood, because you had these very soft-spoken hosts and these little like routines and everything. They're great. Definitely look it up on YouTube if you've never seen a PBS telethon before. It is definitely a very interesting part of American culture, which I hadn't thought about until just recently. So very nice. So that is one of the rapid fire stories we had. So our machine gun just kind of jammed a little bit with public television. Another one, though, so this is slightly related to COVID. We've talked about this in the past, the Āglona procession. So basically, every year, as we've talked about before, there are different pilgrims who go from all corners of Latvia to Āglona for this major kind of religious festival.
Catholic.
Yeah, Catholic, yeah. And apparently the very first pilgrims have just set off, according to some different reports, and people will be walking all across Latvia. I know some people who have done this before. I don't know if you have seen them in person, either of you guys, but I do know some people who have done it before.
Well, I have seen the special train that goes like from Riga to Jelgava via Kruspils to Āglona, which they organize because of the huge amount of people who are going there.
Yeah, and a lot of people like to actually physically walk there too. The big question is this a good idea this year because of COVID? Should it happen? So as of now, it is happening. Whether or not it's a good idea,
With one major change. This year, admission to the main proceedings will only be on the basis of invitations. It will not be a mass event. The Catholic Church has already said that.
Yeah. But still, I don't know. I mean, the general trend has been moving, more and more towards getting back to regular life. I don't know if we, I don't know. I mean, I guess it'll probably be fine, but we'll have to see.
I think that they would be able to proceed, and there perhaps are some other things that they could take from America, or even I think it was also in the Netherlands, things such as the drive-in church, the possibility to have, let's say, the religious services of your specific community in a way that is responsible, especially when there is a pandemic going on. So I think they would have the opportunity to do that as long as they do that respectfully to the rest of the society.
One other quick story before we move on to international. So if you are interested in fresh local food, which if you live in Latvia, you should be, because the prices for fresh local produce are just ridiculously lower than in America. In America and just in general, produce, at least where I'm from, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure in Chicago it's even worse. For good produce is very, very high. But here in Latvia, you can find good. No, it's not the case.
In Chicago, it's actually better because Chicago is a hub for transportation from all over the United States.
Yeah, because you're in the Midwest. Yeah,
in Maine, which is way, way, way the hell up there in the woods.
Yeah. So that's the case. But so if you're interested in finding fresh local produce, so there's a new internet site you can go to, novadagarsa.lv. So it's novadagarsa.lv. So there are lists of local farmers that you can find, and so this should be very interesting for you if you are interested in local food. So that's just about.
I'll say it once in Latvian. Novadagarsa.
Novadagarsa. Yeah, exactly. Or Novadagarsa. It looks like there's
Novadagarsa.
Yeah, like
Garsa, probably.
The taste of the region, I guess, is like the direct translation, but it doesn't quite sound so good. So let us move on. Okay, and we've got a few very important international stories to cover. The first one, which is a little bit of an unfortunate blast in the past, has to do with troops going to Iraq. And for a lot of us, growing up in the 2000s, or just living through the 2000s in general, Iraq was the major kind of international, especially in America, the major international thing which everyone was thinking about. But there are still NATO troops in Iraq, quite a few, and Latvia is planning on sending 34 of them, Otto. So what exactly will these troops be doing in Iraq?
Yeah, and perhaps let me clarify that perhaps from the Latvian perspective, I would not use the word unfortunate, as in our case, we do have a professional army, such as you would have also in the United States. At the same time, the participation, the specific soldiers that go and serve in Iraq, in this case, do that voluntarily. They also have additional benefits or so. But to get back to the story, so the parliament has approved of 34 of our soldiers to continue participating in this mission for at least another year or two. And that will be our contribution to this NATO effort, which has been established and continued also in response to the plea from the national government in Baghdad to assist them in retaining stability in this country that has been ravaged by Daesh, the so-called Islamic State group, and other different geopolitical problems that this country and the region has had for the last 20 or more years. In that regard, it shows that Latvia feels strongly about its commitment to the United States, which is our key strategic partner, as well as to the common NATO effort, because of course the Middle East may be closer to Europe than it is to United States, and even though Europe or any European initiatives aren't there as such, any instability would certainly affect Europe more in some aspects than it would the United States.
Yeah.
Here, I would also want to add that if you want to know more or find another examples of our involvement in collective security, my visit to the cinema was connected to one of the movies that has been put out there, specifically filmed The Outpost, which deals about this specific military outpost of Allied forces in Afghanistan, where also soldier from Latvia participated in some of the harshest conditions in combat that you could see in this conflict, and we have also lost our soldiers to this collective security and to our alliance.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify real quick. When I say unfortunate, it's just because, when the Iraq War was first sold to Americans, the idea that we would still be needing to train soldiers in the year 2020 would definitely have not been a very good selling point. So, because so many people lost their lives, both, Americans, but especially Iraqis,
Yes.
due to the chaos that happened afterwards and, the kind of mismanagement of that. So that's what I mean there. Any thoughts about this, Carlos, real quick before we move on?
The most important thing that Otto said was this is a continuation of a process. This is not something new. But the only other thing I would say, isn't it interesting how we are all looking at George Bush the younger and the dumber much more positively in comparison to what America has now?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know what to comment on that really exactly, but I know that is a very common that is a very common sentiment shared by a lot of people. Whether or not it's I don't know.
Well, being the only non-American on the show, I'll get back to the title of the show, Latvia Weekly, and we'll avoid commenting on the matters that you as citizens certainly feel much stronger about than I do.
Or we can go to Belarus, which is
Yes.
one of our neighbors, by the way. A lot of people kind of forget about Belarus as our neighbor because, we usually think about Lithuania to the south, Estonia to the north, and then Russia to the east. But to our southeast, we have Belarus, and we have a pretty significant border with Belarus as well, and also some pretty significant relations with Belarus as well. And they have an election coming up very, very soon. I know that Otto and Carlos wanted to comment on this. I will let Otto do this first real quick because, he had some specific things, and I know, Carlos, you wanted to talk about this too. But tell us, why should we in Latvia, Otto, be paying attention to the Belarusian election?
Yeah. So Belarus is indeed one of our neighbors, and it is important for us in the sense of our stability, the regional stability and security, as well as the economic connections, because Belarus is also an important economic partner to us. There are several aspects with regard to the upcoming election that we have to remember, and I'll try to keep to the facts. One being that the current president of Belarus, Mr. Lukashenko, has been in his position for over than 20 years, and I think since 1994 has been in this position. And there have been some other candidates who will contest the August 9 election. Some of them have retracted their applications. Some of them have been prevented from running by the Central Electoral Committee, either due to some charges that the part of the signatures that you required to run are not valid, or had some other points. So now there are 4 other candidates, 2 female and 2 male candidates that will run against him. So it is certainly very important whichever candidate may win. It will be very important as Belarus is a presidential republic, and the stability of this country will have very concrete repercussions to us. Also, not only just because there is Latvia as a neighbor to Belarus or vice versa, but also with regard to relationship that Russia has with Belarus and how that affects our strategic neighborhood. And here why I mentioned Russia specifically is the other fact that I wanted to include in the story, the recent announcement by Lukashenko government that 30 or so private military contractors from Russia have been arrested in Minsk at this time with the accusation, with the charge that they have been sent there to try to create some negative acts that would disturb the social stability and security in the period before the election.
Carlos, I know you wanted to comment too.
Yeah, one thing that Latvia really needs to look at is the fact that we are starting to see in Russia itself that people are sick of the Putin thing. The thing that's going on in Siberia over that regional governor who was arrested Those have been very massive demonstrations in a country in which officially you are not allowed to demonstrate if there is more than one of you. If something like if it appears that the Belarusian election will once again be basically stolen, there may be uprisings in Belarus, and as a neighboring country, that is something that we need to keep in mind in terms of the possibility of people fleeing. And one last thing that I would add is that sort of a fun historical geographic fact. Between the two world wars, the part of our border that is now with Belarus was actually with Poland.
Yes, actually, on the map that I have in my living room, Otto, you
Oh,
looked
you have an old time map?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can show that to you guys later. But yeah, going off that a little bit, the relationship between Latvia and the West is often kind of oversimplified, where we have, for example, Latvia and Belarus as kind of best friends, going against that. It's certainly not the case. Latvia and Belarus have maybe even a more complicated relationship than with Latvia and Western Europe. It's something, again, if you want to hear more about this issue, you can definitely listen to Kristaps Andersson's podcast, the Eastern Border, because he talks about this on a regular basis, and I know he's going to be talking about the Belarusian election as well over the next few weeks. There was a heavy movement for Belarus and Russia to basically become a unified country again under the quote unquote union state, which has been under wraps. That has the brakes have basically been put on that for some time. But that there's a lot of reasons why Russia might want to intervene in that election as well. It's going to be a very fascinating situation to keep an eye on. Yes. So I would suggest that everybody keep an eye on what's happening in Belarus, because there will be implications all throughout the region.
And let me also mention that it is also an important issue, an important question to quite a few people in Latvia, as the Latvian Belarusian community is one of the largest communities here. So approximately 50,000 people are Latvian Belarusians, so people who have roots in this country. Some of them hold citizenship, so they will also vote. And certainly whichever Belarus goes after August 9 will certainly be very interesting to many people in our country.
Yeah. So moving on a little bit. So specifically for our British listeners, which I know that we have at least a few, if you have not registered officially now as a resident of Latvia, you should have done that quite some time ago, because we've been saying over and over and over and over again that Brexit is happening, and a lot of people have kind of forgotten about Brexit, because now the world's a completely different place than it was at the beginning of the year. But Brexit is not over. Brexit is a process. The Brexit that happened earlier was just the transition to this temporary agreement. There has to be a long-term agreement that is negotiated between the EU and the United Kingdom, and that, first of all, has not been happening on time. It is definitely very unlikely to happen right now with this current situation of the world before the end of the year. I'm sure that there will be some kind of another kind of stopgap, some kind of intermediate measure, but not necessarily. So definitely, please go ahead and register, as you really should have already, and contact the British Embassy if you've not done that, because I know there are still people who haven't done that, and that is slightly crazy to me. So any other comments, Otto and Carlos, before?
Well, I think you're right. It will be your individual responsibility. You have the embassy, you have the information, and well, there may be a stopgap or another interim solution, but I'm very skeptical about it.
Yeah.
You have to be ready for the worst situation. But even if it does not get as bad, you will still have to have registered, because you will have a completely different state once Great Britain is out of the EU completely.
Definitely.
And it's not just Britons in Latvia; it's also all the Latvians in Great Britain. I'm sure some are listening who also have to think about this kind of thing. I don't think they're going to come to a deal, basically because the Johnson government doesn't really know what it wants out of the relationship in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Brexit so much before. I don't want to get into it now, but definitely, just be careful and keep an eye on what's going on. Last kind of international story, which I think is a positive thing, and so do a wide majority of the people on the Latvia Weekly Facebook page. I put up a poll question about this morning, and it seemed like over 90% of people agreed that they are excited for this. So there is a plan that has been previously reported, I think we've even talked about on the show before, a joint project between Estonia and Latvia to build a major wind farm in the Gulf of Riga. Kind of as part of the kind of offshore, the trend towards offshore wind projects that I've been hearing about pretty much my entire life, and very few of which have actually come into commission already. But for anybody who has been to the Gulf of Riga or the Baltic Sea in general, you know that it is quite windy, and it definitely seems like a logical place to have wind farms. Of course, there are economic concerns and environmental concerns, but it looks like both the governments are serious about it, and it looks like there's support from higher up as well. So it looks like something that will actually happen. So I don't know. I agree with the 90%. I am a fan of wind power. I mean, certainly, not perfect, but considering the alternatives, we do need electricity. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to have this lovely podcast, and especially this technologically advanced view screen above us.
And I say probably one other strategically beneficial thing is that perhaps this will also come along with improvements in the inter-country electricity connection. So if you put like the wind park on the border, you have to have a good connection, which we need. As you know, we are buying the electricity or selling it on the Nord Pool exchange for electricity, and certainly we need good connections so that in case one fails, we would still have enough of a reserve.
Yes. Okay, I think it is officially time to wrap this thing up. So let's start to roll things down with the week in history. So Otto, tell us about August 1st, 1914.
So that is, of course, and I say of course because I studied history so very much, the date when World War I started, and that is specifically the date when Germany, the Imperial Germany, declared war against the Russian Empire. And it matters to Latvia because at that time Latvia was part of Russian Empire, and after this declaration of war, one of the first shots that were actually delivered and carried out were by the German Marine that attacked the military naval fortress in Liepāja. So that is actually where the war on the Eastern Front started big time, which is why Liepāja and also this part of the world is so important. As you know, just after Liepāja and Palang, you had the border between these two main combatants of the war.
Yep. Any other anything else to add, Carlos, before we move on to
on the other end of Latvia's period of independence, today is 80 years since the Supreme Council, the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union approved Latvia's request to become a member of the USSR.
Oh, okay.
And here, let me qualify.
Or tomorrow will be.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
And here, let me qualify that that is, of course, we are talking about this request that did not have legal standing under international law. Of course, the popular Saima, as it was called, was, of course, a puppet government, a puppet parliament, elected in contravention of even the Latvian and the fourth Soviet electoral law, which is part of this occupation and incorporation process between June and August when the Soviet Union did what we know it did.
Yes.
And I will be discussing this in great detail on the television show Kārlis Streips tomorrow evening at 10:30 on Rīga TV 24.
Exactly, which is a great way to translate into what to do this week. So yes, first of all, definitely check out Carlos's show. You can also watch it on xtv.lv, which I think, I have not tried it outside of Latvia before, but I think that it is...
it works all around the world.
Okay, that's great, because not all of, for example, TV Play does not work all throughout the world, unfortunately, and some of the other like online, portals to watch TV, but you can definitely watch that. Great way to practice your Latvian, because it's a good listening task. Because you do talk very clearly, but very quickly as well, because you have so much to talk about. Exactly. I just watched last night actually.
Because I'm an American.
Yes.
Americans talk quickly in all languages.
As we do as well. We talk pretty quickly on the show too.
We try. We have to. We have so many stories always.
Yeah. But it's a fantastic show. You should definitely watch it. We've tried to watch it every day this week actually, Leek and I, which has only been 2 days, I guess. Or today's Tuesday, so I guess just one day. But we will try to watch it again tonight too. Some other things you can do this week though, besides TV, are you can check out Liepaja, because at the fortress on the seaside, you can check out the ferro concrete remains of naval battery positions. So I have actually I haven't checked out those ruins before, kind of in that region, but there's ruins all throughout Liepaja, which are absolutely fascinating. Different bunkers which you can access different old batteries. Definitely should check it out. I know, Otto, you've also, as a fan of military history as well, check that out. Speaking of World War I as well, as we mentioned last week on the show, if you are in the UK, you can watch the amazing film De Vesseloputnis, which has been translated as The Rifleman, which is about Latvia's experience through World War I. So if you are not here to check out where it actually happened, then you can check out the film.
And make sure that you see the full version, because in some cinemas, 20 minutes have been cut out of it.
Really? I did not know that.
Not for content purposes, but just because they figure that the average Brit does not want to sit through a much longer film than that. But there are cinemas which are showing the whole uncut.
Okay, because it isn't even that long, I don't think.
No, I think I read somewhere, I haven't seen it, but allegedly part of the romantic love story or some parts of that have been cut out.
That's one of the best parts. I liked it. I love the movie. I mean, it's definitely...
I loved it too.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
That's one of my top 3 Latvian films, definitely. So, then also, speaking of Latvian films, there's The Outpost, which Otto mentioned a little bit earlier. Have you watched it yet, Otto?
Yes,
because I haven't. Yeah.
Yes, I watched it, and it is, of course, not a family picture. It shows the reality of conflict very closely. At the same time, it is very well done, and I'm very proud that the Latvian input in our alliance has been shown in this way on a major movie that is seen all over the world.
Yes. And while it remains a separate novods, you can go check out Ixchile. You can also check out Ixchile even after it's no longer its own separate novods, because it's not going to disappear completely off the map, just as an administrative territory. So it is not a life or death fight. This regional reform certainly.
And exactly, and let me recommend it personally, because there you would have the River Daugava and a very nice concrete promenade just by the riverside, which you can use for walking, running, or riding a bike. And of course, from there you can also see the St. Maynard's Island, which hosts the ruins of one of the first churches that were built in Latvia in the 12th century already, and is frequently chosen as a site for marriages.
Mm-hmm.
And I will point out that the Daugava also flows through Riga. There's also a promenade, and to tie in with the movie Homo Novus, which was a big hit last year, the novel on which it is based starts with the words, "At 6:42 p.m., 2 trains arrived at the Riga Central Station, one from Vecpiebalga and the other from Paris." During the first period of independence, you could take the train all the way to Paris.
Exactly.
From Vecpiebalga. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And then also River Daugava goes through Ogre as well, which is kind of on the way. So you can go from Riga to Ixchile Ogre. So those are our 2 suggestions from Otto and I where to visit. I know, Carlos, we talked already about places to visit throughout Latvia. You are a strong fan of Riga, as you just mentioned, but these are both pretty close to Riga, so you can easily get there from the train to either one. The train to Ogre goes through Ixchile, so definitely a lot to see there. Ogre also has lovely hills as well, actually, which are very nice. I've been there a few times for different school things.
And I hear there's a new restaurant in Jelgava.
Yes, exactly. Which I don't know if it's something like Center Cafe. I cannot recommend it yet because I have not eaten there.
Probably we'll be able to give a review on the next show.
Yes, or if it's not very good, maybe I won't. But I don't know. But definitely, I'm a fan of supporting local businesses, so I hope that it's good. Before we wrap up this kind of mega episode, which I hope that all of you have enjoyed as much as I have on this rainy afternoon with nothing else to do, I want to give a shout out to Noel, who is listening from Ireland, and also Keen, who's listening from Ireland. And Keen also mentioned one story which we did not cover, which is that a World War II partisan bunker was found in the woods of Ārzemnieki, which is not one that had been discovered before. But there were so many of these all throughout the country that I'm sure there are still some that are undiscovered because people were using them all the way deep into Soviet occupation.
Exactly, and like one sentence, to add to this, so it's probably the best response that one has to some accusations that Latvia joined the Soviet Union voluntarily, as you would have more than 50,000 people, including some of my relatives, who were there in the forests even up until 1956 and later on, because we know very much that independence has cost us dearly and probably always will.
Certainly.
And this particular group was known as, for reasons that I cannot understand, as the Kanadas Pieci, the Canadian Five.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if any of you listening know why they are called the Canadian Five, then you can please mention it, and we will talk about it on the next episode. And we'll try to find out as well. But until then, thank you, Otto and Kārlis, as well for joining us on this episode. Definitely check out Kārlis's show tonight and it's 5 days a week, isn't it? Still, it's
5 days a week, and this evening we're discussing solar eclipses.
So there you go.
We'll find out at 10:30.
Exactly. And then Otto and I will not be on Thursday. We will be next week with the next Riga City Council episode. So we will see you next Monday or Tuesday. So I hope that all of you have a very, very nice week. I hope that it is not too rainy or too hot. I hope that it's like Goldilocks weather, just right. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Please go to our Facebook page, Latvia Weekly, subscribe, see stories of the day every day. Subscribe to us on YouTube, your favorite podcast app. And until next time, visu labu visiem.
Visu labu.